Alright folks, let's dive into what's shaping up to be a fascinating and possibly dramatic stretch of weather ahead. I've been digging through the long-range models, watching every new satellite loop, and I can tell you right now, things are starting to get really interesting across North America. We're going to talk about the cold, the snow, and something that's happening way up in the Arctic that might just be hinting at how this winter could unfold. But first, let me set the stage. Because while most people are just now getting into the fall mindset, the atmosphere is already laying the groundwork for winter. Up north, across the Arctic Circle, snow is starting to stack up, and fast. That's not just a pretty sight on the satellite maps, that's energy. That's cold, dense, heavy air building up over Siberia. And that's the kind of setup that can change the entire game when it comes to early winter patterns. And it's not just the snowpack that's got my attention, it's what's happening out west, in the eastern Pacific, that could really shape what kind of winter we end up with. Now, we've been watching that La Niña signature, trying to hang on as we roll deeper into fall. But here's the twist. The ocean temperatures and upper airflow are starting to hint that we could slip into something much more neutral by mid-winter. That's a major wildcard, because a neutral ENSO pattern can send the jet stream on a totally different path. And once that happens, you can get huge changes in where the storms form and where the cold air dives south. By the way, if you'd like specific weather forecasts for your region or city, please leave them in the comments. I'll answer them individually as time allows. Also, if you like the video and subscribe to my channel, you'd be very grateful. Now let's move on. Let me show you where the cold air is sitting right now. Compared to last year, we've got noticeably more snow covering the Canadian prairies. And even across parts of Asia, the snowpack's stretching a bit farther south. There's also more ice forming north of Alaska this time around. That's the kind of development that tells me this cold air isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Across Siberia, that dome of high pressure you're seeing, that's thick. Heavy freezing air pressing down at the surface. It's building. And when that air mass finally starts to shift east, it's going to spill right over toward Alaska. The models are already hinting at that setup as we move into next week. If we take a look from the top down, literally from the North Pole looking south, you can see it clearly. A pocket of cool air slides into the northeast for a bit, but the real cold, the big stuff, is still stacking up over Siberia. And that's exactly what you want to watch if you're looking for signs of how winter will unfold in North America. Back here at home, we've got a reinforcing shot of cooler air coming in this weekend. That's going to trigger some storm activity, maybe even some severe weather, Saturday into Sunday, as that front slides east. The setup's dynamic enough that I wouldn't be surprised if we see a few strong storms stretching toward the east coast before this system finally pushes out. But the story doesn't stop there. Up north, those long-wave troughs are starting to dip a little farther south. And once that pattern gets established, late in the month, maybe toward the 29th or 30th, we could be looking at our first real taste of early season chill. The GFS has been hinting at it, and while it's still a long way out, if it verifies, we could be ending the month on a winter-like note. And you know what really matters right now? That warm pool of water sitting out across the North Pacific. It's feeding energy into the atmosphere, helping build and intensify those storms that track into the Gulf of Alaska. Every time that cold air from Siberia interacts with those warm waters, it creates the kind of setup that cranks out powerful storms and sets the tone for what's to come in early winter. Now, short term, not a ton of snow over the Arctic just yet. It's mostly cold. Dry air for now, but the snowpack will grow. And the temperatures? They're staying locked in below freezing. That's the kind of pattern that doesn't let up. And here's something I really want you to pay attention to. The ensemble guidance, especially from the European model, is screaming that snow is going to start piling up big time across Alaska, British Columbia, and the Pacific Northwest. That warm Pacific water will supercharge incoming systems, dragging those troughs farther south, and that's where we start to see our first real bouts of heavy mountain snow. Maybe even early November kickstarting winter for those regions. With this strong Pacific jet stream locked in, it could actually pin some of that cold air in place once we transition into the winter months. That's where La Niña comes in. Or rather, this week La Niña we've got developing. It's not strong, but it matters. Because with that warm Pacific setup, we'll likely get a stronger subtropical jet that keeps the southern US active and stormy. But as this pattern transitions toward neutral by January and February, the whole balance shifts. So what does that mean? Well, it likely sets us up for a wet, stormy Pacific Northwest. Colder and somewhat drier air diving into the northern plains and Great Lakes, and an active storm corridor stretching from the Ohio Valley back toward the deep south as those two jet streams start to meet and interact. All right, let's talk short term again. Heading into Thursday and Friday, a major storm will slam into Alaska, bringing wind, rain, and snow across the mountains and interior. We'll also see snow flying in parts of Wyoming, and some light snow spilling into the northern Rockies by the end of the week. By Friday, a pocket of cold air starts dipping south into Montana and the Dakotas, signaling the start of that northern plains cool down. Out east, another low-pressure system lingers offshore, keeping the surf up, and the air a bit unsettled heading into the weekend. But the real energy builds back west. Another strong Pacific system comes crashing into British Columbia Sunday, and that's when the rain and mountain snow really ramp up. As that happens, the cold air sinks farther south, dropping snow levels across the Pacific Northwest. And from there, this parade of storms just keeps rolling. Low after low developing and pushing inland, classic La Niña behavior. The jet stream starts to look more wavy, dipping farther south, and by the time we hit the 28th or 29th, I think we could be knocking on winter's door. If that cold air manages to spill out of Siberia and into the North American pattern, buckle up. Now, let's talk precipitation. Because this part of the story ties everything together. In classic La Niña style, I expect the Southwest to run drier than normal. The storm track tends to lift northward, leaving Southern California, Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico with fewer winter storms than usual. On the other hand, the Pacific Northwest should see frequent systems rolling in off the ocean. The kind that bring wave after wave of rain, mountain snow, and gray skies. If you live in Washington, or Oregon, you might want to get used to soggy weekends, because that's how this setup works. Moving east, the southeast could also end up on the drier side this winter. When the jet stream arcs north through the middle of the country, that region often gets left behind. Fewer big rainmakers, fewer southern snow setups. And again, that ties back to that ridge we were talking about earlier. Meanwhile, from the plains up through the Midwest, the Great Lakes, and into parts of the Northeast, it's a very different story. Those areas are primed for above-average precipitation. We've already seen this pattern forming in recent weeks, and it fits perfectly with the kind of weak La Niña signal we're seeing now. So what does all that mean for snowfall? This is where things get really fun, and maybe a little unpredictable. When you combine colder than normal air across the northern tier of the country with an active storm track slicing through the central US, that's a recipe for plenty of snow potential. I expect a broad swath of the northern plains, the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes, and interior parts of the Northeast to have an above-average chance of snowfall this year. These areas could see storm after storm rolling through, with just enough cold air in place to turn rain into snow more often than usual. Now, I can already hear the question. What about the South? What about the Southeast? Great question. Even though some of those regions are likely to be drier overall, they could still sneak in a few surprise snow or ice events. In the South, it's not the moisture that's usually missing. It's the cold air. So, if one of these big Arctic blasts makes it far enough south, and it happens to line up with a passing storm, you can absolutely get snow in places like northern Georgia, Alabama, or the Carolinas. I'm not saying we're looking at anything like the deep freeze of 2021, but I do think the ingredients are there for at least one or two memorable winter events. Up north, though, that's where the real action could be. The combination of consistent cold, an active storm track, and warm Great Lakes water is setting the stage for a classic lake effect setup. Some of the Great Lakes are running at near-record warmth right now. And that means when cold Arctic air starts blowing over that warmer water, the result could be heavy snow bands, the kind that can drop a foot or more overnight. Alright. If you'd like specific weather forecasts for your region or city, leave your region or city in the comments. I'll answer them individually as I have time. Commenting is completely free. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.